Variance Hearing Board to order at 5:32 on the 13th of October. I'd like to note that all four board members are present: Mr. Herlock, Ms. Neiswender, myself, and Mr. Gasparino. Will all those giving testimony tonight please rise to be sworn in? Thank you.
You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you. We're going to hear two petitions tonight, the first of which is petition number 807. This is the petition of PTI Advanced Filtration, Inc. for a short variance from APCD Rule 29.C, Conditions on Permits, violation of permit conditions. Will the representatives of the petitioners please take the seats to our left? Are you the only gentleman here from PTI? Okay.
Yes, I am.
Would you state your name and your position with the firm for the record?
My name is Jim Templin. I'm the Environmental Health and Safety Manager of PTI Technologies.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Would you like to present your petition to us?
I would. I have a couple of show and tells, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Mr. Stubblefield,
Yes, Mr. Duvall.
I think we need a question with counsel. We just realized that the company is PTI Technologies, Inc. The public notice was issued for PTI Advanced.
Yeah, I wondered about that because I had a folder already that said Technologies, but the petition said Advanced Filtration. I assumed they had changed their name.
Well, they're...
Or it was a different division.
There's Parker Advanced Filtration, which used to be a PTI Technologies company.
Is there a history of the name that could be put on the record, whether there are any DBAs doing business as, or?
If I might clarify, I work for PTI Technologies, Inc., and at a previous date, Advanced Filtration was owned by PTI Technologies, but has been sold off, and it's now owned by Parker. So that's a different entity.
Well, has there ever been a PTI Advanced Filtration, Inc.?
Yes.
And is that who's appearing tonight?
No.
You got failure of notice. The issue would then be whether there's any prejudice shown, and it would be up to you to either continue it to the next meeting date or to hear it subject to someone being able to show prejudice. It's a notice provision, it's a prejudice issue other than a Brown Act issue. Those are all determined, by there being prejudice shown.
Mike,
You have no
question.
complaints at issue in either of your petitions.
Right, but question, could we, rather than waste the time of the applicant to come back a second time, can we hear the evidence this evening and then make a final ruling on November 10th? Would that be appropriate?
You could hear it, do a notice for the next one as a continued item, and see if anyone came forward to show prejudice from not being able to attend tonight's meeting. And if there wasn't any, then there would be, as they say, no harm, no foul, and you could finalize it at that meeting.
So the possible issue is that because of the incorrect public posting of the name, that perhaps someone who might have wanted to come, a member of the public,
and affect
An interested
anyone,
party
an interested
who
party.
might have been interested in appearing might not have because
They didn't recognize
they
the
didn't
name.
recognize the name of the firm. Keith, what's our, I mean, we have a timeline to deal with here, right?
Yes, and what we can do is use enforcement discretion until pending the next hearing. If the hearing is, if the variance petition is granted, then there would be no issue for PTI Technologies. If your board chose to deny the petition for some reason, then this interim time, they would be at risk of enforcement action.
So we could hold the hearing tonight.
Well,
We could hear the petition tonight.
okay. Yeah,
The short notice does not have a published, or a short variance does not require a published notice, so there was nothing published in the paper. The notice just went to the hearing board members, staff, ARB, the usual parties. So there was nothing published in the paper. It only requires 10-day notice to the, to the hearing board members, company, et cetera. And there would be enough time to resend that prior to the November 10th hearing. So all the correction would go to EPA and ARB, and they would be the ones who would be the most affected by the change
So
in name.
is staff recommending that we postpone the petition until the 10th?
No, I'm just making the point that there was nothing published in the paper, so the public wouldn't have heard about it anyway.
Okay.
But EPA and ARB would have gotten, you would have received this notice with the petition.
Mr. Gasparino?
Yes, I'd like to follow up with the attorney's view of what we should do, and that is at least the option that we should consider is to listen to the petitioner and take all that information, ask questions, et cetera, and then postpone until the next hearing, and at that point make a decision on the variance. As Kate said, he's here already.
Yeah. I would like to do the same thing. Just hear it tonight. If there's no, if anyone has any objections, we can list those objections on November 10th, and perhaps make a different decision based on those objections. But I'm not seeing anybody here tonight on this petition, and if the public didn't get notice through publication anyway, that would be my
agree.
suggestion. Move forward.
Mr. Hurla?
Where did the November 10th date come at?
Because we're going to have two more petitioners on the 10th.
Oh, just happens to be another,
We've already scheduled the 10th as a,
oh, I haven't seen that, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm fine with hearing the
Hearing it
testimony.
tonight. Okay.
And if we want to take an action, I don't know, but that's probably the call of the board.
I have one question for council. Couldn't we make a decision tonight and just have Chris, when she posts our findings, our decision, she could just make the corrections?
Well, the issue would be whether anyone objected to the hearing being held without the proper notice. The statutory requirements for the notice go to those agencies, but also there's a Brown Act compliance issue. But
Okay.
to ensure your action is final, you should at least continue the final action to the next meeting, or hold
Okay.
the whole matter
All
at
right.
the next meeting.
Thank you. Okay. Would you like to
Okay, proceed?
go ahead and
Okay.
proceed with your petition?
Thank you. I'm Jim Templin, the Environmental Health and Safety Manager for PTI Technologies. We're located at 501 Del Norte Boulevard in Oxnard, and we manufacture a large number of filtration products. Some of those are for About half of those are for the aerospace industry, and about half of those are for the automotive industry, fluid power industries, and so forth. I've passed around a couple examples of what we manufacture. One of those is a filter element. The filter element, the majority of those get what we call a bubble test, and that's where we use our IPA, our isopropyl alcohol. The modules, and I've passed around a typical module. There are many different types. Those basically hold the filter elements. That particular one goes on an aircraft. I'm not sure exactly which one. I want to say about a year and a half ago, Mr. Tony Scarpolino, who was my predecessor, had filed for an authority to construct, because we have, in addition to the bubble testing, we also have 4 hexane stations which we use for wipe clean, and we also have what we call a DOF room, which is a degree of filtration room. That's part of our engineering lab, and in the DOF room we do various tests of certain filter elements. After the tests are performed, the modules and the lab equipment are rinsed with hexane, and thus that's the hexane used at the DOF room. When Mr. Scarpolino had applied for the original authority to construct, that was granted in, I believe it was approximately April of 2007. And that authority to construct had 2 aspects to it. One was to change the catalytic oxidizer we're using to break down the ROC emissions, and the second was to build a capture system to capture the hexane vapors that are currently coming from the 4 wipe clean stations and the DOF station. When that was granted, when that was issued to us, PTI began the process of constructing the capture system. By far the easier part of that was the capture system around the 4 cold cleaning wipe clean stations. So that was constructed first. That capture also was ducted over to the catalytic oxidizer. The plans for the DOF room, that was somewhat more complicated, and so that's a little bit further away, and it was a little bit tougher to do, so that didn't occur at the same time. In the meantime, the management took a look at the catalytic oxidizer we had, and the cost to replace that was on the order of $250,000, and called the original manufacturer of the existing oxidizer and said, is there anything we can do to this to make sure that it stays at least up to the 90% destruction efficiency? So catalytic combustion came out, looked at it, told us that we could basically rebuild the unit, which is what we had them do. They replaced the gaskets, they went through the catalysts and refurbished them, and then ran a short test on it. Then in last year, would have been September of 2007, we ran our scheduled destruction efficiency test of the catalytic oxidizer, and we got something like 97% destruction efficiency, and our permit requires that we be at least 90%. So we were good to go on that. What we had not completed at that point was the construction of the permanent total enclosure and the ducting of the DOF room. Subsequently, we have done that. In fact, we completed that in August of 2008. At that point, we weren't really quite ready to run the capture efficiency testing because we still have a little bit more work to do the balancing of the airflows. And so we're requesting a short variance so that we don't have to duplicate the test, which normally would have been scheduled to have been done before October 1st, as required by our existing permit to operate. We are scheduled to do that test on November 4th, which would then combine both the capture efficiency tests and the destruction efficiency tests at that time. At this point, we believe that we're not emitting any excess ROCs into the environment, and as evidence for that, the majority of the hexane was run through the catalytic oxidizer prior to the scheduled destruction efficiency test of September of 2007. So since we were at 97% at that date, we believe that we were capturing not only the IPA but also the hexane emissions, which weren't yet a requirement for us. I guess I'd also like to say that when I look at our normal business cycle, we do somewhere on the order of just under $60 million a year. Most of our business, and thus most of our production, is in the last 2 quarters of our fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from roughly October 1st through September 30th, give or take a few days. So I believe that at this point, we're not emitting any excess emissions into the air, and we're not, what we're doing is not, it's not giving the public any more nuisance than they had, also because our production numbers are down for this first quarter and the next quarter. So with that, we would request the short variance so that we can continue with the rest of the work, which would be to finish our air balancing and then complete our capture efficiency and destruction efficiency testing by November 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Templin.
You're welcome.
Do any board members have questions of the petitioner? No questions? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Temple, I have having a little trouble understanding exactly the scope of things in the timeline. What was the scope of your authority to construct? Let me try and see if I have it right. It was to replace the catalytic oxidizer with another technology.
With a new catalytic oxidizer,
Okay.
yes.
It was to bring the IPA fumes to that which were already ducted to the old one and to destroy them.
No, the IPA fumes already go to the catalytic oxidizer. That would not have changed. The hexane fumes, however, which are a smaller portion of our emission, would, under the authority to construct, be brought into the catalytic oxidizer along with the IPA fumes.
But okay, so the end result of having met the scope of the authority to construct would be that you had a new catalytic oxidizer, and you had a system to capture all of the IPA and hexane fumes and destroy them to 90%.
Yes.
That's the scope of the.
That's the scope. Yes.
And at some point, the company decided to repair the existing catalytic oxidizer instead of replace.
That's correct.
And was then that work really was different from what was authorized. Is that?
That's correct.
Was the district informed of that?
That was about the point when I took this position on, which would have been in September of 2007, and the official from the Air Pollution Control District who was witnessing the test, the normally scheduled test in September of 2007, noticed the difference between the model number on the authority to construct and the model number of the catalytic oxidizer we had.
So the answer is you don't know, but possibly not.
Say again, please?
The answer to my question is that you don't know whether they were informed by the company, but it's possible that they only found out.
Yes, that's correct.
Was your company ever issued a permit to operate the system that was built under the authority to construct?
We were issued a temporary permit to operate.
And when was that?
The temporary permit to operate was issued on February 20th of 2008.
So what was the test in September 2007?
The test in 2007 was the actual test or the required test?
Was it the test to complete the authority to construct?
No, that was the annual test required for the original permit to operate. The one we've been running under for quite a few years.
Oh, but then I'm a little confused. So you did your annual test during the authority to construct period
Yes,
with the old refurbished catalytic oxidizer, even though the authority to construct was for replacement. Is that,
yes,
am I
because
getting-
the authority to construct had not been completed. Only part of that was completed.
was the test, was the temporary permit to operate in February 2008, did that include the completion of the authority to construct, including the enclosure of the wipe clean stations and the DOF and ducting that to the refurbished catalytic oxidizer?
Yes. When I go back to the test that was done in September of 2007, and the officer of the Air Pollution Control District noticed the difference in the model numbers, then he instructed me to notify the district, which I did in a letter, and then I was asked to apply for a new authority to construct, which I did. And the new authority to construct, I don't have a copy in front of me, but our intention with that was to use the existing old catalytic oxidizer and then add the capture of the hexane stations, the 4 cold clean stations, and the DOF station.
The DOF and the stations and the capture was not part of the original authority to construct?
Yes, they were part of the original
Okay.
authority to construct.
So really the only change in the new request for an authority to construct was the difference in the catalytic oxidizer?
That's correct.
And the notices of variation that you notice as a violation were for what?
The notices of violation were for operating with the authority to construct. One of the requirements is to have the test done, the destruction efficiency and capture efficiency test done within 60 days of the startup of the system. And that was one. The other was the other was, it's not coming to me right now.
We can ask the district, they may know. Okay, I don't think I have any further questions. I'm still a little confused about the timeline, and maybe the district can help us out. It's not.
Do any other members of the board have any questions of the petitioner? Do any members of the board have any questions of the district? Ms. Nicewinder?
I thought I understood, Keith, what was happening until,
It's all in there, Katie.
until the last 10 minutes went by. But the important part for me is that there seems to be a disconnect. The first part of the staff report indicates October 1st, they're supposed to have a test. They did it 07, they didn't do it 08. They didn't do it 08, except that in August, they got a notice of violation. What prompted the notice of violation?
Okay.
Don't say what we just heard.
In February of 08, PTI Technologies received what we call a temporary operating permit. As a follow-up to the September 07 source test, Lyle Olson, who, I think it was Lyle Olson who works in the compliance division, and went out and observed the test and noted that the old catalytic oxidizer was still on site. He'd advised him to apply for a permit to operate for the new hookup of the hexane systems. And so Mr. Templin submitted a permit application on January 21st of 2008. And along with that, and he was granted a temporary operating permit February 20th of 2008. And that allows them to operate the system as it was described in their authority to construct, which was issued in April of 07. But along with that letter, he was also issued another letter, what we call an incomplete letter, that says your application's incomplete because you need to do a source test of the new system, and you need to give us, before doing that, you need to give us a source test protocol to describe how that source test is going to be conducted, and who's going to do it, and where the sampling is going to occur. And 6 months went by and we didn't hear anything from PTI Technologies. So on August 13th of 2008, the engineering division denied their application for permit to operate for that new system because they didn't follow through and give us the protocol, and they didn't conduct the testing. So by our rules and regulations, if an application isn't made complete within 6 months, we can deny the permit application. So Mr. Templin then gave us, following on right on the heels of that, then we issued 2 notices of violation to PTI Technologies. One was for operating without a permit, and one was for not testing the new system within 60 days of completion.
Then what did they test in October of 07 that came out at 97% capture?
Their permit to operate that they've had for a number of years requires that by October 1st of every year, they have to do a capture and control test, source test. The September '07 test met that requirement. And from what we knew at the time, that was their annual compliance test. What PTI believes is during that test, the four hexane degreasers were tied into that control system. The only other hexane system that wasn't tied into that was this DOF, the hexane cleaning station that's in their engineering building. And the test report that we received and that we reviewed and that did show very good control efficiency indicated it was only for the isopropyl alcohol systems. So we evaluated that test based on the IPA system. So that there's no documentation that the hexane system was included in there. It's very likely that it's very possible that it could be. So where we are now is that their 2008 annual compliance test is due. And they also have to do their source test to show compliance with the authority to construct, to show that these new hexane systems are achieving the required capture and control efficiency. So rather than doing a test a couple of weeks ago and then having to redo the test again, yes, sir.
So, when I read this in my office today, I got the impression that they were in violation, at least partly because they were using a refurbished rather than a brand new catalytic oxidizer, and yet they passed with flying colors. So I'm just curious, are they required to use a new one if the old one, refurbished old one, is still that efficient?
No, if they can demonstrate that the old catalytic oxidizer meets the required capture and control efficiency, then we're fine with that. We'll leave the old control system on the permit and just add the new hexane points. But we were concerned, not knowing really whether the hexane systems really were evaluated in the September '07 test or not, and we had some concerns that the old control system was really capable of handling this added airflow from these hexane systems. So we wanted to make sure that it was going to be capable of handling that extra airflow from the different systems. So that's why we're anxious to get this test done and know that it is including the hexane systems. But we really don't want them to go through the expense of doing one test and then a couple weeks later doing another test, because they are expensive tests.
You got that?
I'm much more comfortable.
Carrie, do you have any questions? No questions. Does the district have any questions of the petitioner?
Maybe just to kind of cover some of the findings of fact. If your variance wasn't granted, and the board commanded that you discontinue operation of the hexane systems, what would happen to PTI's business?
If we had to curtail the operation of our hexane systems, that would affect about 31% of our business, or a little over $17 million worth of business. We would have to lay off 11 people, and we would have something over 1,000 contracts that would go unfulfilled. And these are contracts to the government, to the military, to various aerospace firms and others.
If the hexane emission points, the hexane cleaning operations, they were previously permitted as emission sources,
Yes.
and so now they're being added to an additional control system. In your estimation, what's the result of adding those emissions to the control system?
The result of adding those emissions to the control system, we're using something around 1,000 gallons of hexane per year, and we would capture virtually all those emissions rather than putting them into the atmosphere.
Is it PTI's intent to continue directing those hexane emissions to the catalytic oxidizer during the period of this variance? So
Yes.
as to
Yes.
continuously give some additional emission reductions?
Oh, yes.
Has PTI received any complaints regarding odors or concerns about hexane emissions?
No.
And I think those are all the questions that I have.
I have another question of the petitioner,
Yes.
just for my own curiosity. This catalyzer, if I understand it correctly, it's breaking these emissions from hexane and isopropyl alcohol. The
Yes.
idea is that it breaks it down into less harmful constituents,
That's correct.
and then those are emitted into the atmosphere.
That's right.
Could you give me an example of what kind of less harmful substances you're emitting?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I'm not a chemist. Mostly water vapor and carbon dioxide.
So they're not criteria pollutants?
No.
Okay.
No. These systems have been thoroughly evaluated in the past using similar chemicals. And there's never been a concern raised.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have no further questions. Mr. Herlock? Want to take another shot?
I do, yeah. I still have some questions of Mr. Templin. One of the findings we have to make, and it's always, or often, the most difficult one, is that you're here, we're here, and due to conditions beyond the reasonable control of PTI, or whatever the name of the company is, and basically that it isn't your fault, not you personally, but the company's fault. And I realize there were extenuating circumstances with changes of personnel inside the company, but that doesn't make it any easier to make this finding. Could you help me, if possible, come to the conclusion that PTI isn't, at least partly, if not largely, at fault for the situation we're in right now?
The construction, the actual physical construction for the 4 hexane wipe clean stations was easier, partly because of the location, partly because of those units. If you look in what I passed around, those green tanks are the hexane cold clean stations, and there are 4 of those. The DOF room is actually part of the engineering test lab, and ducting the emissions from that were somewhat more difficult and took longer to do. So we weren't able to complete those within the 6-month period, and so when we looked at it, since that hadn't been done, we actually hadn't done the startup of the system yet, even though it wasn't done all at one day, all at one time, switched over. It was done gradually through a construction period.
So you've been operating under the arrangement that the degreasing stations have been ducted to the catalytic converter since sometime last winter, but the DOF is only
Sometime
now.
last spring, yes.
there was no hexane operation that was ducted to the catalytic converter for the February 2008 test? I thought
Well,
I thought-
actually, the test was in September of 2007. And at that point, 4 of the stations, the 4 hexane stations, were ducted to the catalytic oxidizer. The ducting of the DOF station had not yet been done.
And that's the issue, that the district doesn't have any documentation about the hexane being ducted.
That's what I understand, yes.
And the DOF has never been ducted to the catalytic converter.
Not until recently, we actually completed the ducting of that in August of 2008, toward the end of August of 2008.
The company has been operating a system that is configured different from the permit since sometime last fall or last winter. Is that
That's correct.
It doesn't help me a lot, but okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question for the petitioner. What happened in January, I guess what was that, January 98, on the bubble testing, when you got really close to your mandated threshold?
Oh, January 98? I can't really say at that point. The only thing I could say is it may have been a variation in business. I wasn't with the company at that point.
Is this part of the evidence?
It hasn't been introduced as evidence. You just pass these out as informational items?
That's as information to show that, for the most part, our usage is approximately continuous from year to year, time to time.
Do the members of the board think there should be introduced as evidence? I mean, aside from these 2 charts, the rest of it's just,
I don't think that's our call.
yeah,
I think it's
it's up to you. Yeah.
it's between the petitioner and the district, I think.
Mr.
Yeah,
Gasparino?
Mr. Chair, I have a question of the
sir.
petitioner, Mr. Templing. After what you heard the district say, can you tell me now whether or not you're going to move forward, or are you going to fall back to the refurbished unit?
Well, our plan is to use the refurbished unit because from all the evidence we have, it will continue to work for us. And our plan is, we've also submitted a protocol for the capture efficiency and destruction efficiency, and we've scheduled that to be tested on November 4th.
And so you feel comfortable that you can meet the scheduled dates that you signed off on?
Oh, yes, yes,
Okay. All right, thank you.
yes.
I asked the district question, Mr. Duval. Is PTI have an active, valid authority to construct the system that is going to be in as configured at the end of this variance period?
They still have pending, you might say, the authority to construct that was issued in April of 2007 that allows them to connect the hexane cleaning stations to the catalytic oxidizer. They've recently submitted a source test protocol to us. Our engineering division had a few questions, and they responded promptly to those questions. And when we denied their permit to operate application in August, we told them that if they respond to those issues, that we'll reinstate the temporary operating permit. So from our standpoint, they're moving along the right path. They still have a valid permit to operate for the control system and the IPA system, and they've still, in fact, they still have a valid permit to operate for the hexane system, just not connected to the control system.
Thank you. But that's the subject of the temporary permit,
That's correct.
which is still active?
I think now that they've responded to the issues of the source test protocol, we haven't taken any formal action on that to reactivate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Templin,
Yes.
just one final question. Are you confident that you can pass the tests
Oh, yes.
with the mandated date that the district has given you,
Yes.
November 11th?
Yes.
Thank you. Board members have any more questions for the petitioner? Does the district have any more questions for the petitioner?
No, we don't.
Does the board have any more questions for the district? Okay, I'm going to call this hearing closed. Is there any discussion by the board?
I guess we still have the issue of whether we're going to take an action or continue the action based on Mr. Gasparino's suggestion earlier.
I have one comment on that, if I can be heard. If I can question the district, was the notice that was given, did it include the petition? Because the petition has the correct name and address, is that correct, Mr. Templin?
Yes.
As on page 2 of the petition.
Yeah, it does.
It
So
does.
it would
Yes,
only
it
be
does.
a typographical error on the first page of the notice if
Declaration of
if
mailing.
all the parties got the entire packet. In which case, I'd say you could go forward today. Because anyone who read the whole thing would see it was just a typographical error.
Hearing that, is there any discussion by the board? Well, personally, I think that we should grant the petition. The district doesn't have any issues with the emissions that are going to be emitted in the meantime.
No, we don't.
And the petitioner is confident that they can achieve compliance by the 11 November date. So I would move that we grant this petition.
Second.
Clerk, I'm going to take a vote.
Mr. Gasparino, how do you vote?
Aye.
Mr. Hurlock?
Aye.
Ms. Wyman?
Aye.
Member Stubblefield?
Aye. Mr. Templin, your petition is granted.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, our second petition tonight is petition number 808, the petition of Vinico, Inc., for a short variance from APCD Rule 26, New Source Review, and Rule 74.9, Stationary Internal Combustion Engines.
Arrived late, he was not sworn in.
Okay. Are you going to give testimony?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You want to swear him in? Raise your right
Please
hand.
raise your right hand. You and each of you do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matters now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
It's over to the right.
Oh, yeah.
Sir, would you state your name and your position with the firm?
Yes, my name is Pat Portman, and I am the environmental coordinator of what is called our Santa Clara Unit Facilities.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before we go any further,
Mr. Gasparino?
I would like to at least inform the board and our council that associated with the company, though the individual is not going to apparently testify, there is a relationship with respect to a professional organization that I have with the gentleman in the audience who works for Veneco. Though I never do business with the company, we do not talk business. I just thought I'd raise that and present that before the board in case there was an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparino. I don't have any issue with that. Does anyone else?
I don't.
No.
Counsel?
The only issue would be if someone from either party showed any kind of prejudice or something that would call into question Mr. Gasparino's impartiality. So unless you have anything like that before you, he can act on this panel.
Thank you.
Mr. Stubblefield, the
Yes, sir.
district wouldn't object either. We wouldn't object.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Corcoran, would you like to present your petition to us, please?
I'll give you a little background first. Back in August of this year, we have 3 compressors on platform gate, which we operate in the outer continental shelf waters out here in the channel. Now these are air compressors. I do now. Now, these 3 air compressors provide air to the platform. They are electric compressors, and they provide air for various systems on the platform, pneumatic valving, etc., sulfur removal process. They are essential to the operation of the platform. Under normal operating conditions, we operate 2 of those compressors at a time, and 1 serves as a backup. Back in August, we had one of these compressors completely fail on us, and a second was just about ready to fail. So at that time, we approached the APCD with a permit application to permit a portable engine. This would be a diesel-driven engine to put out there to replace the one engine that was that had failed. Well, then the other engine that was in question, it decided to go down at the same time. So we approached the APCD again about filing for another permit to add an additional engine. And we actually filed a permit with the APCD and then met with them. And it was determined that the particular use of this engine, it would not be considered a portable engine, but an essential part of the platform. And under APCD rules, we would have to take a different permitting path than what we took on that original application. And that permitting path would require the engine to be controlled with catalytic controls. And this engine is a rental engine that is actually, when we filed the permit, it was on behalf of the company that we were going to rent this engine from. And after discussions with the APCD, they said, well, you should probably file for an emergency variance because, first of all, it would be very difficult to get this thing to, in the proper controls and get it permitted when we needed it now. So we filed for emergency variance in early September and were granted to use these 2 backup engines. Where we are today is the one of the engines that was that went out of service has been repaired and is back in service. So currently we have 2 electric compressors out there that, out of the 3 that we normally have, that are in good shape. The platform requires on normal, everyday operations that we run with 2 and have 1 as a standby. So where we are here, why we're here today is to get the variance from Rule 74.9 and 26.4, Keith? To have that third engine, or that so it'll be one leftover diesel-fired engine to remain on the platform and to be used as a backup only. Now, if everything goes smoothly, the two electric engines can be utilized. If there is somewhat of a malfunction or a question about the operation of a particular engine, then that we may want to utilize the backup engine while we investigate the problem with the other one. We have ordered and the replacement engine, which would bring us back to our normal operation of 3. We anticipate this engine will be on the platform around mid-December and will be operational within a week to 10 days once we receive that engine. So essentially, if everything goes as planned, this this diesel engine will be operated minimally at best, during this time period until we can get our last replacement engine back in place, or our last engine.
You mean at worst?
Yeah, at work. Okay. But the timeline right now is that by mid-December we will have everything in order and have no need for these engines.
Do any members of the board have any questions of the petitioner? Ms. Nicewinder?
How often, can you predict how often you'd use the backup generator?
I can't predict that. I can say that it is unlikely, but you never know. That's why we have a third engine out there, is because we do never know.
So there's no intention to use the backup generator unless the first 2 engines somehow fail.
If and only when one of those electric engines.
One of them goes out.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board for the petitioner? Mr. Gasparino?
I was waiting for Steve on that one. Sir, I have a question of you. Reading through your petition, I see here that the downside is your production, let's see if I have it right here, is impacted at X number of barrels. Let's see if I can actually find it here. 5,500 barrels per day of oil and 5,000 cubic feet per day of gas. Okay?
That's correct.
That's if you shut down, or that's if the petition is denied.
That's correct.
However, under the curtailment of your operations, you kind of allude to the same figures. So my question is there not something you can do to curtail your operations should, let's say, the need for the backup not occur, or let's say it does occur but you don't use the system, so your production rate goes down?
If we do not have 2 compressors at the capacity of the existing compressors out there, we would have to shut the entire platform down.
So there is no curtailment?
There is no curtailment.
Okay. Thank you.
Does the board have any further questions for the petitioner? Does the district have any questions for the petitioner?
Maybe just a couple questions to help kind of complete the record. It is the failure of the electric compressors. Is it something that's foreseeable that you could have taken any action ahead of time to prevent?
We follow a pretty rigorous maintenance schedule on these things to avoid those things. So, is there an ongoing attempt to keep from getting in these kind of positions? The answer is yes. It was just an unfortunate and coincidental thing that these two things go down. Now, understandably, from our point of view, we want to keep those things in working order because we can't afford to lose them.
Are you aware how much each of the electric compressors costs as a new unit? Do you know how much you're spending for a brand new unit?
I don't have that. That number has been told to me before,
Okay.
but off the top of my head, I can't tell you.
We're talking more than a few $1,000s.
Oh, yes, we're talking, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars with a new compressor and installation.
Okay, thank you. We already covered the notion that you really can't curtail your operation by shutting down operating on one compressor. During this variance period, is it Veneco's intent to use the diesel engine as the backup and operate the two electrics as
The
prime?
intent is to use it as a backup and not one of the primary engines.
Your platform is located, I think, 10 or 14 miles offshore.
I believe they consider it 12.
Okay, so you're not in any proximity to any populated areas that would be impacted.
That's correct.
Okay. Those are all the questions that I have.
Do the members of the board have any comments or questions for the district? Mr. Herlock?
I have a question for the district that's probably more informational than having a bearing on this petition. Is District Rule 74.9, remind me, that really could never be satisfied by a portable temporary engine? And it's stated in the documentation that this engine is the cleanest diesel that you can get at the 300 horsepower level, and yet the district says it can't meet the requirements of 74.9.
Right. In order to meet Rule 74.9, I think primarily for oxides of nitrogen emissions, something along the order of a selective catalytic reduction system would have to be added onto it. So the engine as it is today would not comply primarily for NOx emissions.
Are there portable rental engines that have control at this level?
No.
Thank you.
Any other members of the board have any comments or questions for the district? Okay, well, hearing that, I'm going to call this hearing closed. Is there any discussion by the board?
I move we grant the variance. I move we grant the variance.
I second that. Clerk, you want to take the roll?
Board Member Gasparino?
Aye.
Board Member Herlock?
Aye.
Board Member Newfinder? Aye. Board Member Stubblefeld?
Aye. Mr. Corcoran, your petition is granted. Do we have any other items to discuss tonight?
November 10th, we have two more petitions for your consideration, and I think we're going to have an election of officers, since that was due last June. And one other point before you leave tonight, I've got claim forms to file, to sign, and then return those to me, and I'll turn them in tomorrow and get those processed.
Were the November 10th documents mailed? I see that Ms. Nicewinder has them, but I don't think I have them.
Yeah, I got mine.
Okay, thank you.
I think I just got them the other day. I'm not sure there was any mail today. It was Columbus Day. Maybe they didn't. Yeah, so maybe you'll get them tomorrow. I think I got mine Saturday. Would this be an appropriate time to talk about the difficulties that some of us may have had getting paid?
Sure.
Has anybody else had any problems with, because I haven't, yeah, I don't either, until I got my W-4. So that was months ago, and that was when my wife said, she said, that's funny, I don't remember you going to that many meetings recently. And I said, well, I haven't. I'd granted some emergency variances. But at that time, Chris checked into it, and in fact, there were a bunch of post-June 2007, right, emergency variances that I had granted, and also some meetings that we had had. And I thought Roberta had taken care of that, but then Roberta's not the clerk anymore, is that correct?
Well,
Marty Robinson is now?
Well, it falls, Carrie can maybe help us out. Roberta is the clerk of the Board of Supervisors, and so it's her responsibility to do the clerking. Historically, the clerk of the board had been giving you the claim forms and then submitting those to the auditor. And then I was getting those to approve, and so as soon as I got those, I would just sign them off and give them to our fiscal people. Last week, Chris put together a table with your board's hearings, both regular and emergency variances, I think going back to June of '07, June or July of '07. And so we're in the process of working with the Auditor Controller's Office to find out what payments have been made or not made. And so we're intending to get you caught up. And so from this point on, we're going to be providing you with the claim
That's what
forms.
you were saying, yeah. Okay.
Collect those, and then I can just sign those off tomorrow morning and give those to our fiscal people and get those through the system.
Thank you.
So our apologies. We didn't realize until you brought
It's
it
not
up.
that big a deal. It's not that much money, I'm sure.
Well, we owe it to you, so.
Yeah.
I know I get really upset when people don't pay us, so.
Well, yeah. Does anybody else have anything?
I have one item,
Gary?
and maybe it's because I've been gone so long, but
Yeah, welcome back.
I found reading the increments of progress very enlightening and very informative. Maybe you did them when I was originally on this hearing board, but thank you very much.
Did anybody go to that advanced hearing workshop?
Yes, I did.
You went, okay. Yeah, I didn't go.
It was excellent,
Much
I
stuff
think, this
there,
time.
yeah. We're going to have another one here soon. Those are my favorites.
On the hearing board workshops, Chris works closely with ARB's people that run the variance program, and so, you know, every couple of years we put in a request to have it here, and depends on
That's
the
'cause they wanna get out of
depends on
LA
the travel.
for the weekend.
They love to get out of Sacramento, especially in the summertime, and but it depends on their travel budget and things like that. The state budget these days, they may be tied to their desks.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting closed at 6:41.
So what are we still here?
This is your claim form for tonight's.
Tonight, okay.